All right, showered, done, baby sleeping. Let's talk. About what? So I'm taking a class called uh, historical thinking, or really it's a philosophy of history. Um, in the class, we're exploring a lot of different books on how history has been done, frameworks to work from, philosophies in history. Um, and the whole class kind of centers around one major question: what is history? So, for the most part, I don't find this question to have been answered all that well, if at all. In fact, in this postmodern age, and we'll get into some explanations on what that really means, but in this postmodern age, there's come this kind of challenge to traditional thinking, challenge to traditional thought, really challenge to modernism, and in that, there is a challenge to this idea of truth, of what is actually knowable, and in that has come this thinking that certain things just aren't knowable. So we as historians who rely on things like what we call primary sources, how accurate can the sources be? How much can we actually know about the past? And in actuality, in this framework, in this philosophy, not much. Um, and in that, that's kind of informed the field that these what we think we may know may not be so. There might be new sources in the future. There might come a new way of looking at things that radically changes our understanding of things. So, if that's being the case, how do we know what we're actually doing in history is accurate? Um, well, we can't know. And if that's the case, then what we really do in history isn't necessarily about actually getting to an idea of the past. It's a process. It's a way of doing things. It's a way of looking at things, and the whole scope is kind of just open to interpretation, open to new methods, open to uh, a variety of different things. Now, the problem with that is, let me gather my thoughts. The problem with that is the meaning, the asking of the question of what is history, why do we do history, these questions kind of become irrelevant, to the point where we should just be happy about doing history. We should just do history to do history. And whatever meaning you want to derive from that, and whatever fulfillment you want to derive from that, then so be it. Um, I don't work in a postmodern thought. I don't work in a postmodern framework, and I honestly think it's a terrible way to think about things, because in day-to-day life, in really reality, that's just not how we function. We function with some idea of knowing. In fact, that's what usually drives culture forward, that drives individuals forward, that drives institution, and it drives all these things that really do make up the human process, the history of humanity. Um, so, um, and there's a lot of things that are informing postmodernism, but let's not make this a video about postmodernism. Let's deal with this question: what is history? What are we doing as historians? Um, and I think it comes down to two different categories. There are historians who really do believe that we as historians are more of sociologists, more of anthropologists, that history really is a science. Um, and they will advocate and argue in that framework. And I'll analyze whether history is a science or not at another point. The other side thinks that history is a humanities. It's dealing much more with uh, literary understanding. It's dealing with philosophical ideas. It's dealing with history as understanding the human condition. So, um, much more loaded in ideologies and thinkings, and not so much in sociology. And then of course, you might be able to have a hybrid of those two, and you'll see that in people's work who, will draw on some sort of ideology, but they also use some sociological references or statistics or whatever it may be, and they try to pull all of these things together. Um, but I think understanding how we think about history, whether it is a sociology or whether it is a humanities, is where part of the problem is. But I work from a different framework. I have a whole different worldview, which deals a lot more with understanding as the crux of what we do across the board. Whether you are a business major, whether you are a entrepreneur, whether you are um, religious, whether you are not religious, whether you're a historian or not, whatever the categories may be. Um, let's wait for them to go by. Almost every day they go down that street. I don't know. I don't even know what that is all about. So, whatever it may be, what we really want to gain is understanding, and that only comes within three categories. When we fulfill these three categories, when we understand these three, um, the answer to these three ultimate questions, and that is identity. Who am I? Who are we? Identity, purpose. Why are we here? What are we doing? What am I doing? Why am I here? Whether you want to take it down to the individual level. And then once we understand who we are and why we're here, then we can understand the more interesting question of where are we going? The um, the question of destiny. And these are things that we see throughout groups. A lot of this stems from other business readings and a great book is Good to Great by Jim Collins. And some of this has kind of just stemmed from my own understandings and readings and philosophy, of course, dealings with religion. But understanding these three fundamental, the answers to these fundamental questions really gives us a direction. So, and I think that if we take those things and we apply them to the field of history and ask those questions, identify exactly what is history, and then what is its purpose? Why are we doing it? And then we can say, well, all right, well, then this is how we do it. And for the most part, I feel that history has kind of been an idea that's just been up in the air. We have Rank, Leopold von Rank, who's regarded as like the godfather of scholastic history. He really kind of set it as its own category within the university. And he had a particular set of understandings of this is how you do history, this is what history is all about. And I probably should say that with like a German accent or whatever. I think he was German. Anyways. And then you have kind of these evolution of ideas. Collingwood becomes one. Actually, I think, yeah, he's a little bit after Ronk, who's dealing with the philosophy of history, the idea of history. And then we have a progression of ideas and kind of these challenges to how one does history. But hardly any of them actually really deal with what is history and why do we do it. They kind of dance around those things and say these are some methods for history, or this is the thinking behind history. And of course that path that we are on is completely devastated after the World Wars, particularly World War II, which led into this postmodern thinking, which has permeated the field for since really the 50s, heavily in the 60s, and then of course really kind of worked over in the 70s and 80s with postmodern thinking. And you get into all these different categories. But anyways, so think about that. I'm thinking about that all the time, especially as trying to figure out what am I doing as a historian? What is it that I want to achieve in my master's, and why do we do it? I have my understandings. Excuse me. What is history? Why are we doing it? And those are really important. Especially if you feel passionate enough to go on and try and teach history to another generation, because there's a lot of history that molds who we are, that molds the way we think, that molds and shapes our ideology. But we'll save that for another time. Share your thoughts. Let me know what you think. I will probably keep rambling and sharing mine, but for the most part, I got to get to some work. Anyways, I'll see you later. Peace out.